Welcome to GIP Reports. Today we will dive into some of the more commonly used GIP reports. In supply chain management, we have other means by which we check our metrics to establish how well we are doing. For instance, the various reports available to us on DSAP. However, it's important that we are able to discern these foundational GIP reports in order to find root causes of issues and correct these issues to positively affect our performance. The first report we will go over is the Package Discrepancy Report. BHA Directive 1761 Parent 1 suggests running this report weekly. However, best practice is to get in the habit of running this report daily or before you autogen. You may ask why. This seems like overkill. Some errors captured by this report, if not fixed, can cause you not to be able to correctly perform an auto-generation, which will affect your ability to properly auto-generate orders, thus running the risk of stock outages. This report looks for different errors between the primary inventory point and the item master file. Some of the errors you may encounter are inventory point and item master file discrepancies in unit of receipt versus unit of purchase, conversion factor errors, a change in mandatory procurement source prior to the receipt of an order. Note the example on the slide. This vendor was selected for these purchase orders, and prior to receipt, the item master file was updated to replace this vendor with a different mandatory procurement source. Creating a packaging discrepancy. In order for this to be corrected, the current mandatory procurement source will need to be removed to allow the purchase order to be received into the inventory. Similar to the example just discussed, items or vendors that have been inactivated after being placed on an order will also hit this report. And finally, incomplete information in the item master file. This is probably one of the most important inventory maintenance reports to run, and in my opinion, if done often enough, incredibly quick to do. The next report we will discuss is the stock status report. So just a quick note on this report. This is a real-time report, meaning you have to run this report at 12:01 a.m. on the first of every month to check the month prior. You can't fall behind and run the report in August for June's numbers. If you do, your numbers will be off. The stock status report is basically a snapshot of the overall health of the inventory point that month. You'll want to watch for large disparities in receipts versus usage, which may indicate over or understocking issues. The adjustments row shows you manual adjustments made in the inventory due to discrepancies. So you'll want to keep a watchful eye on too many adjustments, which could indicate improper maintenance or management of the inventory. The turnover rate shows you how many times the inventory has turned in that month. But be aware that pending receipts have an effect on overall numbers. So you'll want to ensure that all partials received that day are received into the inventory to get a true turnover rate on this report. Two more categories on the stock status report are inactive items and long supply. You'll notice you have number of items, dollar value, and percent of items in each category. At this point, you'll want to focus on your standard items and run your days of stock on hand report to see if there are par levels you can adjust to decrease stagnant supply. You'll also want to run your usage item demand report to ensure the standard items are properly turning. If not, they can be recategorized as on demand. Working your inactive and long supply in this manner will decrease your numbers in inactive and long supply and increase your performance metrics. Next up is the history of distribution report. If you want to look like a genius, run this report and provide these numbers to finance for fund transfers. Many times, we provide supplies to secondary areas that may have their own funding. With this report, you're able to capture dollars by means of inventory value spent in other areas within a given time frame. With this information, you can recoup those funds spent in those areas by requesting cost transfers. This can be done quarterly, yearly, or whatever works best at your facility. The History of Distribution report is also a great report for forecasting budgetary needs, especially if plotted over a timeline. You can visually see increases or decreases in distribution trends, which will help you decide if next year you will need a 3% increase in your budget or a 1% decrease. Moving on to the emergency stock level report. Moving on to the emergency stock level report. Now, don't let the name of this report scare you. This is a flag for review report. There are multiple reasons why items show up on the emergency stock level report. The key is to review and determine why each item is on the report and to continuously check to ensure it's cleared up as soon as possible. Some of the reasons why an item may show up on this report are: the item is a true on-demand item, not just a slow mover, meaning it's not ordered until requested by the end user or at a certain time of year. Or the part levels, emergency, or reorder points are set incorrectly or need to be re-evaluated. Or there truly is an emergent need for an item. The takeaway here is that appearance on the emergency stock level report does not mean immediate reorder, but it does mean review immediately. Otherwise, you could be looking at stock outages, which affect patient care and makes it difficult to forecast usage due to inconsistency in data. Reminder to all: bad information going in means bad information coming out. Again, you'll want to watch for open orders that have been stagnant so that they can be procured elsewhere in order not to affect patient care. Now let's talk about the due-in report. The due-in report lives up to its name. It shows you everything that's on order and due in. The report is broken down by items due in rather than purchase orders, which gives you the ability to see if there's an order or multiple orders against the same item. This is important to watch so that you don't get into overstocking issues. Another thing to be mindful of when looking at this report is to ensure there is movement in the items. Items go on and come off. Otherwise, you may be in a backorder situation and will need to seek an alternate procurement source before you get into an emergent situation. Take a look at the red due-ins on this screen. Multiple orders were placed against this same item. Now take a look at the estimated delivery date of these orders and the date this due-in report was run. It seems like this item was in a backorder situation and months later this item still hasn't arrived. I hope they found an alternate source, otherwise this outage could be affecting patient care. Lastly, you'll notice under the estimated delivery date partial field is a date of when to expect shipment. If you go past that date and no delivery has occurred, follow-up is needed. Now, some of these have a number instead of a date. This tells you that a partial has arrived and it has not been received into the inventory yet. The days of stock on hand report is the bread and butter of the GIP reports. This report takes you from maintenance to management of inventory. You should always pull at least 90 days of data, but not too much over, so you can get a real-time average of how much is being used. Deeply fluctuating usage will affect your ability to get good data for your forecasting parallel. You should always pull at least 90 days of data, but not too much over, so you can get a real-time average of how much is being used. Deeply fluctuating usage will affect your ability to get good data for forecasting par levels. For days of stock less than 30 days, both the standard and on-demand items can be run on the same report. When I run my days of stock on hand report, I also run the due in report and compare the two. Anything that is due in, I know I've already addressed and I can move forward. I also like to use the graph usage report. This is a great tool to use at this point because it will help you set par levels according to average usage. You'll want to be mindful of trends, peaks and valleys for seasonal items, or a sudden drop or increase in usage may indicate a change in practice, so you'll want to communicate with your end users. Again, fluctuating usage or improperly managing an inventory, for instance, too many outages or overstocking, will not allow you to establish good data to manage the inventory. Another factor to keep in mind when looking at this report is that sometimes there is a reason why an item is at 0 on hand. Perhaps the item is seasonal. For items more than 30 days on hand, again, you'll want to have at least 90 days of data, but not too much over due to seasonal and environmental changes. Focus on standard items only when running items for more than 30 days. Since all or most of your on-demand items will have more than 30 days of stock on hand. Just as before, using the graph usage report is an excellent tool to determine average use and establish proper par levels. Keep in mind, sometimes packaging causes overages or seasonal items. Setting appropriate par levels and keeping stock at an average of 30 days on hand will keep you off of the overstock report. The last report we will talk about today is the usage demand item report. This is another example of a management versus maintenance GIP report. And this one can pack a punch in your metrics. For the sake of this video, I've run standard and on-demand items together. However, back at the facility, you should run these categories separately. Run 2 reports, one for standard items and one for on-demand. This report looks to see how many times the item has been ordered in a given date range. You'll want to run a whole year of data. For standard items, look for your underperformers. Anything less than 5 turns in a year's time should be changed to on-demand, so it doesn't count against your metrics. For on-demand items, you'll want to find your overachievers and change them to standard so they can get credit for their work. Items turning 5 or more times in a year should be standard. Making these changes will give you credit where credit is due and will not allow slow movers that we just can't do without to be counted against you. Well, that's all for today. I hope you all have taken away something of value from this video. Thanks for joining me.